Hi, and welcome to our GSD Virtual Town Hall. Hi, everyone. It's good to see so many people on this list. I have to say there are a lot of former students, some current students, friends, some faculty who are taking a break from doing admissions. It's a great big group. So thank you for joining us. Thanks for taking your time and convening around this topic and discussion about the role of design in developing engaged citizens. Before I do anything, I'd like to acknowledge that the GSD and Harvard University are located on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Massachusetts people, who are the original inhabitants of what's now known as Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past, present, and future, and we honor the land itself, which remains sacred to those people. The school recognizes the work of the Harvard University Native American program in cultivating the relationships that led to the creation of this land acknowledgement. And of course, the land acknowledgement for us at the GSD is incredibly important because we are very focused on the relationship of land and how it brings us together, sometimes in challenging ways. So I also want to acknowledge the hard work of the development and alumni relations team here at the GSD. They're incredible partners of mine and of the schools. And I believe of all of you as well. And so they put a lot of work in getting this together, including coming up with this topic of the role of design in developing engaged citizens. They came up with this topic last summer. So it's telling that they knew what topic would be quite pertinent to today's situation. And indeed, I think that the pertinence of how we engage as citizens and how we communicate with one another is, let's say, particularly pertinent right now. It would be impossible for me to proceed with this town hall or any event without acknowledging the climate over the past few months at Harvard and across the country. As a university, we've faced many challenging moments, and I have to say that I'm personally quite devastated by the news last week of President Gay's resignation. Since October, my focus as dean has been centered around our students, ensuring that the GSD remains a safe, kind, generous, empathetic, and intellectually engaged community of designers. I think probably most of you on this call are aware, but in case you don't realize it, GSD is the most international school of the entire campus. We also, as you know, work in close and shared quarters and over long periods of time. And so these two factors, in fact, I think have actually benefited us at a moment when deliberate conversation is the only way to navigate the myriad complexities underlying everyone's attempts to find a way forward. Because we work together in close quarters, because we're so diverse a community in terms of where we come from, I think that has actually helped us. And I'll note actually that of the registrants for this webinar, 18% are international or coming from international locations from 30 different countries. So that's actually a sort of a reflection of the school itself. So the collective intention of leadership across the university has been focused on upholding Harvard's values. And I have to say that the deans have come together to work very closely. We were working very closely with Claudine, and now we're working very closely with Alan Garber. I acknowledge that the university, and I would say our country as a whole, have to find ways to better ourselves because of this moment. We need to learn from error. We need to engage in conversation. And we need to strengthen our institutions to better serve our communities. I remain steadfast in leading the GSD through this time. I'm very fortunate to have an incredible community of faculty, staff, students, and alumni. And Harvard will endure. I feel fortunate to be in a position to help guide the GSD to acknowledge and grow from this situation, much as I regret that that's something that we have to do. Before we dive into this thoughtful conversation today, I want to take an opportunity to provide a very, very brief school update. I don't want to take much time, so I'm going to throw some statistics at you. And for that, I have to actually look at my notes because I'm really bad at remembering all these numbers. So here we go. So this year, we're comprised still of 3 different departments, 12 different degree programs, 177 staff members, 205 faculty, 934 students who come to us from 67 different countries. We just launched the Master in Real Estate degree, so we have our first cohort in residence right now, and it's amazingly successful. I met with them before the break, and usually when I meet with a whole cohort from a program, I anticipate all sorts of complaints, and they were unbelievably positive, enthusiastic, and just wanted to get more involved. So it was really exciting for me. It's a program that I think will help the GSD impact well-designed real estate in ways that positively affect society and the environment. So that we have 35 students in the program. It's a 12-month program. You can find more information on the web. This spring semester, the school will offer 142 different courses. It's sort of extraordinary what we have. You can look at these course offerings online on our website. And those include 22 different option studios and 35 different or 35 new course offerings. A couple of the courses that I think are particularly interesting this semester and are new include Hanif Kara, who's an engineer and a professor in the practice in the Department of Architecture. He is teaching a course on embodied carbon, material cycles, circularity, and advances in reverse engineering. And then we have a course which I'm very curious about, being taught by Ignacio Bunster Osa, who's a Loeb Fellow from '93 and a design critic in landscape architecture. Ignacio is teaching a course called Fight or Flight: Space Colonization and the Future of Landscape Architecture. So clearly the landscape department has decided to take over not just the environment, but the entire galaxy. So I'm curious to see what they do. I will say that the courses last fall were incredibly successful, and I'm delighted to see more variety of design work happening in the school, more originality among the students, which I think is very exciting. And so I encourage you to take a look at our website, try and tap into what's going on. I will say we are launching a new website next fall, so stay tuned for that. We'll have another full roster of public programs this spring, of course. I encourage you to join us in person or virtually this spring. The formal announcement will come later this month, so keep tuned in for that. So the town hall format, this is our 4th town hall. And last year we had one on the topic of how design addresses climate change and the way that the GSD is addressing this topic. And one of the things we learned from last year's discussion was it probably is more effective to have fewer speakers and a little more time for exchange. So we've tried to do that this year. And this year's topic focuses on design's power to bring people together. I've asked our 2 speakers to explore the value of public participation in shaping the world that we have together, where we live, where we work, where we connect. How can the design community effectively engage our broader public to improve social interaction, improve our relationship with the environment while prioritizing sustainability, growth, and resiliency? And how can we help people understand really what design is and does? Before introducing our first speaker, let me review a few housekeeping rules. This event is being recorded. The video will be shared by the GSD's YouTube channel in the weeks to come. Closed captioning in English is available if you click the CC button to enable AI-generated captions, so I don't guarantee what those captions will say. And if you have questions or comments during the presentations and panel discussion, this is important, please put them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom screen. There will be time for audience questions after the brief panel discussion. The questions, if there are a lot of questions and if some of them overlap, they'll be grouped together. So don't be surprised if the questions get sort of grouped together as a whole, just for efficiency's sake. We may not get to all the questions if you're really engaged, which I hope you will be. So let me introduce our first speaker. We have two exciting speakers today. Dr. Hazel Ruth Edwards, sorry, Hazel, is a professor of architecture at Howard University's College of Engineering and Architecture, where she was chair of the Department of Architecture from 2016 to 2022. She works to improve livability for all citizens and increase diverse voices in the design and planning fields. Hazel is currently a 2023-24 Radcliffe Institute Fellow, where she's exploring the connections between the historic distinction of land as ours, Black, and theirs, white, articulated by sociocultural and spatial justice practices that have impacted Howard University since its founding. Hazel has a PhD in regional planning from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. She has an MArch in urban design, MAUD, sorry, from Harvard, and a BArch from Howard University. She's currently a member of our Alumni Council, thank you, and she was certified with the American Institute of Certified Planners and was elected to their College of Fellows. In 2021, she was appointed U.S. Commission of Fine Arts by President Joseph Biden. She has also received Architectural Records 2022 Women in Architecture Design Leadership Award in the educator category. So with all that, yes, as Tanya says, hey Tanya, whoop in the chat. So Hazel, I hand the Zoom mic over to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And Tanya, but thank you, Sarah, for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. Let me share my screen real quick. And you can see my screen, I'm assuming. So in my June 2022 TEDx talk, I stated that architecture weaves the tapestry of our lives, connecting us to other people through buildings, neighborhoods, and infrastructure, creatively solving problems through the design of the human environment. Design and citizen engagement are fundamental to making that tapestry. I'm going to share a snapshot of how I've gotten my playbook, if you will, of how I've gone about in my career, I guess, graduating from the GSD, and how to get to understanding design and citizen engagement more particularly. And so it comes down to three activities: getting the knowledge and skills myself, passing it on, and preparing people who seek that knowledge, and fostering the interest for our disciplines in the next generation. So shortly after finishing my formal education and in doing a postdoc at UNC Chapel Hill, I returned to Washington, D.C. in 1995. I was hired by Harry Robinson, who was then the Howard University Vice President for University Administration. He had been the Dean of the School of Architecture and Planning, and he's also a GSD graduate. He hired me to research the physical development of Howard's campus as a framework for the upcoming Central Campus Plan. And the technical document was published as a book we co-authored in 1996. It received a lot of attention in the local media, like this Washington City paper article. The book on the left told the story of the 129-year campus. It celebrated Black architects who designed many of the buildings. The images in the book reveal how Howard has impacted thousands of people and shaped global leaders since 1867. The book continues to inform architects and development teams doing work at the campus to this day, and I'm very proud of that, and I know Harry is as well. In my later role as special assistant for campus planning and development, and as a principal planner for the Central Campus Plan, which you see on the right, I organized for our office a number of community engagement activities, from a focus group with community leaders to a charrette with residents and the architects of the proposed buildings in the plan, in addition to the legally required presentations with the community. And that was where I developed skills to facilitate activities that included the citizens impacted by design and planning intentions. We also held focus groups with the university community, including faculty and students and staff. I've also been involved with several assistance teams sponsored by the American Institute of Architects and the American Planning Association. This one on the screen was looking at the redevelopment opportunities for historically Black neighborhood in Louisville, Kentucky. And so there I am on the right in one of the focus groups that we held with the members of the community. And I want to also say that along the way, I was building a professional network of planners and architects and urban designers, having come from a more academic track, to become a professor than solely practice. And so I started teaching at Morgan State University in 1999. The 2000 census indicated that there were over 50,000 vacant and abandoned properties in Baltimore City, Maryland. My students and I worked in several of those neighborhoods, like the one shown here on the screen. Those neighborhoods were also heavily impacted by drug activity. The high vacancy rate probably helped to facilitate the open air drug markets that we encountered. And it was a very dangerous setting, and I look back and I wonder how did I take students into those conditions? But those were conditions that were prevalent at the time, that the students needed to have an understanding of how to engage the citizens. And so the gentleman who has his back to us was the neighborhood association's president, and we never went into the community without his accompanying us or having the police notified that we were coming, that we were there. And more importantly, at the bottom, you'll see images of the focus groups that we organized with a cross-section of residents, from children to seniors, to get their views on the community and its future. I taught it, in the 8 years I taught at Morgan, we worked with several neighborhoods that were overwhelmed by drug activity, as well as with public agencies for domestic violence. And so I was trying to show our students a broad range of needs and techniques and user groups who and how to approach their concerns about their community. So when I joined the faculty at Catholic University in 2007, my students and I worked in multi-ethnic neighborhoods heavily impacted by gentrification, plus in communities of greater means in Washington, D.C. The common thread was improving livability for all citizens. And so this is one of the studios I taught later in my tenure at Catholic. Second year design studio, but I also taught in other related planning.
Hazel, I hate to cut in, but there are moments when your sound is getting a little garbled. Okay. It's actually when you're not speaking, oddly, there's a little bit of interference. So I don't know if are you using a computer mic, or is it a mic on your fabulous necklace?
It's a computer mic.
Okay.
There might be my papers, moving my papers around.
Okay, so take care with that, just to let you know that there's been a little bit of interference. Thank
Okay,
you.
sorry about that.
No problem.
And so the common theme was improving livability for all citizens. And then I returned to my alma mater, Howard University, in 2016. And I continued to instill in our students the importance of the work that architects and planners engage in. Yes, design, but making citizens' lives better. This is one of the freshman classes. We would each semester, when the freshman class came in, we would have an orientation. And so this was the group that came in 2017. I wanted my students to know just how impactful they can be as future licensed architects and certified planners. And so that same group, this is their second year design studio, architecture design studio, where they were not only learning the technical skills in terms of production, but also, learning to really put together a building and go through the design thinking process. We had just opened our fabrication lab, gotten new computer equipment. And so this was really a wonderful opportunity for our students to learn how to represent their design ideas. Each of us can help to cultivate the next generation of architects, designers, planners, and thought leaders. And I've tried to do that with elementary school and high school students. And so here I'm talking to a fifth grade math and science class about what architects, planners, and real estate developers do. And I developed a game that would engage them in that process, as well as give them the opportunities to make presentations. And I tell you, 10-year-olds are just fantastic in terms of processing information. And I wanted to, and then we had several opportunities where we brought in students to the School of Architecture and Planning at Catholic to go through a similar process of to a community engagement, where they ultimately ended up making a city block, a development with found materials from around the school. And again, wanted to expose them to the design process, including community engagement techniques. More importantly, I've tried to nurture the dreams my students have to address the challenges facing our world. And so as part of those freshman orientation sessions, I asked each student to write, where they saw themselves in 10 years. These are 7 and 18-year-olds. And, I wanted to give them something that they could look back on, 10 years or well after graduation, to see whether their ideas about their future had changed, but also, and how it has changed, but also to really have an understanding and perhaps a guidepost of where they would go with their careers. And so I again wanted to nurture their dreams and have them to understand where they could be in facing the challenges our world is confronting. And so again, in my TEDx talk, I stated that what if the design process was framed by each of our unique memories of the past, recognition of our experiences, and affirmations to embrace an unknown future? This new built fabric would shape and nourish our souls even more because we created it together. And so I believe that an engaged citizenry is a vitally important component of how we prepare the next generations and how we as practitioners and educators can assist in making the world a better place. And in closing, I just want to share the statement I made in my MAUD application in 1986, as it's been a guidepost for me ever since. I want to be involved in solving the problems of urban decay which plague our cities, As a designer, I feel it my responsibility to use my knowledge and understanding of architecture and urban design to address the issues which have caused our cities to decline. I want to be a part of the process that initiates a design methodology that revitalizes the infrastructure of cities and stages their long-term renewal. Through these goals and other ambitions, I intend to make a substantial contribution to our society as a well-rounded professional. And so, you know, I never intended to become an educator, but here I am. And this is where I've landed. And I've tried to, I think in many cases, I've translated this statement into how I address my classes and how I prepare the students for their understanding of design, as well as how they can engage the community. And I've celebrated my love of architecture and design in my own way. And I've nurtured a new generation of planning and design professionals, you know, expressing the built environment in a broad spectrum of cultural values. And again, I think that all of us have a role to play in this process of engaging the citizenry. Thank you.
That was fabulous, Hazel. I can't believe that you still have your MAUD application statement like that. That's incredible. But that was a very beautiful weaving together of your own history and your priorities and how we engage this topic as practitioners and as academics. I look forward to engaging you in conversation more, but first we're going to hear next from Belinda Tato. So Belinda is an architect, a landscape architect, and an urban designer. She's also a faculty member here at the GSD, where she's an associate professor in the practice of landscape architecture. In 2000, Belinda co-founded the Madrid-based firm Ecosistema Urbano, which she also directs. Ecosistema Urbano specializes in urban consultancy, architecture, public space quality assessment, and urban transformation processes. The firm has received innumerable awards and has been written up in many magazines. Over the last decade, the practice has successfully experimented with social software, communication platforms, and the possibilities offered by new technologies to achieve the creation of more democratic urban environments. Belinda has led workshops, lectured, and taught at the world's most prestigious institutions, including our own. She's currently, as I said, an associate professor in the practice of landscape architecture here at the GSD, where she's been teaching since 2010 and is a cherished colleague. Belinda, I hand you the Zoom mic.
Great, thank you so much. Just give me 1 second. Can you see my screen? Yes. Okay, so thank you so much. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be joining this conversation, and thank you, Hazel, for the beautiful presentation. So I will start. So I started to work 20 years ago. I had the opportunity to work in many different parts of the world, and I have not a formal education on participation. So this is something that somehow I found that I had to fill the gap when I became a practitioner in year 2000. And, you know, I'm going to share with you what I learned through the journey, because it's been a learning journey. So the first thing is why? Because cities shape people and citizens shape cities. And I like to think that our work is super important because a better cities make better citizens. And that is because, because design transforms reality. It can change mindsets. It can shape behaviors. It can impact people's lives. It can contribute to creating equity, and it can change the future. And for all of these reasons and many others that are not in this slide, I believe our work is super important. So when I was a student in the 90s, everything was about the individual idea. There wasn't even the internet. So we thought we were all amazing and super creative. And there was this kind of top-down approach to design. So it was, you know, again, single mind, single person, originality. Whereas over the last 23 years, I've been learning that actually it's not just one skill that we need to have. We have to have a number of skills. We have to have a number of collaborators, because every single project that we're dealing with is super complex and requires all these different kind of points of view. So with whom are we doing participation? We try to, to make it as open as possible, no matter how broad we want to make it. It will always be imperfect. So in some occasion, we have come to the neighborhoods, because you cannot just take for granted that just putting a poster and a sign, people are going to show up. People have a lot of limitations, and participation is somehow a luxury. You have to have the time, which is a resource, and not everybody has that resource. So we've been doing meetings with officials. We've been doing translating. In this case, this is in Asunción in Paraguay, where we found out that actually the kids who had been born in the city were completely disengaged from the historical center. So how can we translate their city, their environment into something that they can digest, so that they have to produce their own stories? We have been working in difficult conditions, like in Tegucigalpa, where public space is not, it has a number of challenges. So we were trying to brainstorm with the students on how to improve the public space and their daily journey to school. We've been working in Cuenca. So this idea of expanding the interlocutors, so it's not only about city officials, it's not only about the general public, but we've been doing, targeting specific audiences. This was in Norway, in the city of Hamar, where more than 1,400 students were engaged in their own schools, brainstorming and producing ideas for the future of their main public space. And again, everything from very low tech, in some cases like this, there is, it's a very vulnerable community from Venezuela who moved to a city in Colombia. So the idea of, we are designing a park, how can we engage into a conversation to bring their knowledge and their identity, which is connected to the Venezuela botanic species, to the park. So the question when, so when do we do it? We do it in parallel to design. We try to design a process that is both engaging with the social component, but also informing the designers, which is always us. And the big question for me is the how. So the question is, how can we really, come up with the tools, with the media, to make this participation exciting? And again, I'm learning. First disclaimer, I'm not an expert. I keep on learning. I like to think that, I keep on learning, So participation is a design issue. We've been doing things in many different parts of the world, and that requires a lot of sensibility, because of course, we're working in different cultures where there are a lot of, concerns about public space. We try to identify what are the topics that we need to work on. So it has to be very clear, what is the scope of participation? What is the activity for? What do you want to achieve? Because it's not a open question like everything is possible. And we've been doing this in many different ways. So one way was providing experiences. So how can we, instead of just talking about the future of a space, how can we redo it? How can we transform it? And how can we provide experiences so that actually people can start, again, experiencing the space in a completely different way? So in this case, this is in Norway, where we also organized a workshop with the students from the Bergen Architecture School. They brought, the farmers to the area, and we provided this gratis lunch, which is a free lunch for all the citizens, to talk about the future of the square, from this experience. So again, it's not about just a speculation. It's like, how can we do something, hands-on, real, and how can we bring people together? Every time that I see this slide, I think it's Diane Davis, but it's not, okay, so I promise. But, we did these different activities, the cream hammer, the green hammer, the light hammer. So again, how to activate a space so that, again, people can start thinking, rethinking, and dreaming about the space in a completely different situation. So these are, another way to, to connect with people who are a little bit invisible. So again, it's not just the designer providing all the solutions. In this particular case, we built these benches with the students from a crafts school. It's students who have dropped school and they were doing, carpentry. So the idea was to give them also this visibility. So we co-created with them the benches, and all of a sudden they become protagonists of the story. Another thing that I would like to say is, like, again, also temporary solutions or temporary installations. They may be temporary, but memories will last forever. So this is in the middle of COVID, we were invited to do an installation in front of a middle school in Columbus, Indiana. So the first thing that we did was to run these surveys and to interview the students, and they were very much missing the social aspect of the school. So again, it's not just about the academics. The school is much more than that. So we were thinking, okay, how can we solve that? How can we address that question? We didn't know at that time whether the school would be open by the time that we were opening this, but we were listening to them. So it was about providing climatic comfort. It was about providing the social interface or the social experience. And we built this temporary installation that, again, what I like of it is gone, is recycled, but the memories will last forever. And also the interior of this installation is all these words that we collected from the conversations with the students who were extremely empowered. And I'm gonna run because I know I have 5 minutes. Okay, so so the installation, you know, designers, we always want to put so much on everything that we do. In this particular case, we also wanted to be a kind of a landmark, kind of a speaker to speak about climate change and all the challenges that we're facing as a society. So the 3 colors were actually translating the graphs from the 20th century of deforestation, CO2, and temperature rise in the US. So this idea that, again, everything that we do is not only about acknowledging the community, but also about spreading information and trying to raise awareness. Activism. So we've done a number of things, and I like to highlight that sometimes people ask me, what if you don't have the budget? What if you don't have the time? Okay, we did this installation in 2 hours with 100 students, and it's just 2,200 post-it notes. So sometimes you don't have the time, but you can always do something. And it was very beautiful to send the students to the street and start interviewing everyone, and we collected, and this was part of the final report. But also in some other cases, this was also in Paraguay, this idea that students in a workshop, they were saying, oh, it's such a pity because the mayor has been promising to do bike lines for a while, and he never did, or she never did. So actually they got into action and they painted this in a number of kilometers during the nighttime. So it became an anonymous action. So this idea that we are, through this participation, we're also empowering the communities, and it's a very refreshing and inspiring process, not only for them, but also for us. Also, in this particular case, we didn't have any information about the city, so we also trained students, and they were kind of collectively creating a database of the city, and they were finally hired by the city to continue. Creativity. So we tried to do everything beautiful. We like to bring beauty to everyday life. I love beauty. So in this particular case, we were not in charge of anything that had to do with the planning. We were only invited to do participation, which is kind of tricky, but we try to do something that we can give in return to the community. So we were doing these workshops with every local school, and we were using the red for the problems, the blue for the opportunities, and we created this kind of temporary garden also, so that they could actually walk by and read everybody's feelings. And technology, of course, we've been working with technology. We created a website or a platform a few years ago that we made open source for anyone to use it. And the idea is to create a repository of ideas of how people feel in the different parts of the city. Before social media, we also created our TV channel. That was many years ago. And of course, we're always experimenting with that. This is a platform that is about sharing the planning process of a city and how can we get people engaged, excited, etc. So wrapping up, we are designing the future. How can we make it open, appealing, inviting, inclusive, sustainable, stimulating? So one of the things that I see as a designer is that we are not embracing technologies enough, and cities will become more and more digital. And I think this real-time participation is something that we have to address as designers. And I would like to end with the teaching. So I teach a class on participation, which I very much enjoy. I always ask the students, what is participation for? And this is a list. Of course, it becomes longer every single year. And how? Because the class is about what are the tools? How can we come up with tools to make this participation? So if I have 1 minute, I would like to play just some results. So these are, I always ask the students to end up producing a video, and the video could be it could be telling the story that they have produced. It could be something to get additional funding for their projects. So as you can see, these are different topics. The one on the top left is a group that was exploring how to do a video game so that students or kids would be more aware about environmental issues. The second one is students went and jumped into Newbury Street and the center of Boston to create this kind of virtual reality experience of how the city is going to be sinking in the water so that people could actually become aware of it. And then there's other examples, which are some actions. And the one on the right is about emotions, sharing emotions in an anonymous way, because again, there's a lot of anxiety across campus and the students were very concerned about that. So I know I'm done with time. Sorry for that. I speak a lot, blah, blah, blah. Thank you.
No, Belinda, it was, you had us fast paced, but it was a great presentation. If you can stop your screen sharing, then we can,
Yep.
we can come together. So we will open up the floor to questions, but let me first ask a couple questions. Hazel, if you can come back on camera, that would be great. So I want to thank you both for those really great presentations that show your own histories, but also your teaching on these topics. And I guess I want to start, and maybe this addresses your question in the chat, Anatol. I wanted to start by asking, what about resistance? In other words, you both offered very beautiful, optimistic and positive messages about how we engage communities and offered really great examples. And I have to note, and we'll talk a little bit about the fact that you both also address kids, which I think is an important thing for us to broaden our audience. So that's something. But before addressing that, there is a sort of obvious topic of how do you overcome the resistances, or how do you deal with moments that are challenging in these public engagement examples that you both offered? Can you cite an example of when something didn't quite go so smoothly, and how that played out?
Hazel, do you want to go?
Thank you. I guess I was thinking back to Sarah, one of the community meetings that we participated in, and one of the things I think it was important. So there was some opposition, of course. You know, not everybody's going to love a project. Not everybody's going to have positive things to say about it. Some people can be very combative. And on the one hand, I think it's very important for students to see the range. So when we range of responses and the range of emotions and how to handle that variation. And so I think it's a teaching moment where, and I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, I think it's a teaching moment where you you become the example of how to address a challenge. And some people may want to direct the same kind of energy, perhaps negative energy, at the speaker, but that's not the right response. The response ultimately is about getting to consensus and building trust, and letting the community know that you are listening to them. Because, you know, we as, you know, whenever I was bringing students in or going into a community myself through some of the activities I was engaged in, you know, I'm the outsider. I don't live there in most cases. And so I'm not the expert on how life is in that community. And so again, I think we have to really instill in our students how to listen, that we've got to establish trust. And I'll just leave it at that.
No, I think that's an incredibly important point, and one you know well that I'm very much in favor of teaching people how to listen. Belinda, what about you? Did those cows like every moment of being in that plaza in Norway?
No, I was going to say that we would need another GSD town hall to talk about the challenges, the blood, the tears, and the suffering behind every single process. So, but that's part of the deal. You know, it's not that it's, you know, I always say participation is imperfect, no matter what, but that's the point. And also, when you are giving the floor to people who are against a particular process, you are already getting them a little bit bored anyway, because you are giving the possibility to, you are making the process transparent and accessible, and that creates trust, as Hazel was suggesting. The other thing, I have one particular example to give. So we were working in the planning for a city in Paraguay. So there was, at the beginning, there was a lot of resistance from the community because we were outsiders, although we opened a local office with local people, but we were from Spain, different culture, why them, blah, blah, blah. So we were working very intensely for many months. We held more than, I don't know, 65 workshops with the different communities. And at some point, the community was super engaged. But then the local government changed. So the mayor didn't want to approve the project. And it was actually the community. It was the other way around. It was the community claiming it. So this idea that, politicians go, come and go, but the community is always there. And that's the people that we need to connect to make projects happen. So I have a number of experiences, but again, we will need another another meeting for that.
No, that's very helpful. I wonder if maybe this can help also on this, because so partly there's a challenge, and you both touched on this, of simply communication, right? Because design projects are not necessarily something that people know how to understand. And so each of you showed different means of reaching an audience through visuals, through games. I wonder if you can talk a little bit of the question of language, of how you reach different audiences. And maybe we'll start with you, Belinda, because I'm intrigued that you also have done these different participatory projects nationally and internationally.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. Of course, we've been always exploring new ways to communicate. If we want to get a larger audience interested in city issues, we have to talk their language, or we have to bring them on board onto something exciting. Today, we all have, a TV in our pocket. So it's amazing how things have changed over the last few years, because we really can share a lot on social media, on videos. And I think this idea of kind of exploring new tools to get people excited, like people are all the time sharing content. People are all like, we're very visual. We're a very visual society. So we can, and we are designers, so we can really work with that. And the other thing that I would like to say is that we're exploring, we're testing, and we're learning on the go. And yeah, that's it. Hazel.
Well, on the one hand, I would agree with what Belinda said, and I think that we also, particularly in the community meetings that we held as part of the campus planning process, we had people who were, sign language interpreters, and having graphics and other things, very simple graphics, but graphics that conveyed the ideas that were being presented by the design team, I think were very important. And so it was not as much of a issue of language barriers as much as understanding, kind of making sure that the ideas that were being presented were very understandable. So either through graphics, or just not talking with a lot of jargon, or things that we know today. In my more recent classes, my urban design studio that I taught last fall, the students again were implementing graphics, and very clear graphics to convey the ideas of their projects, so that it was understandable, and understanding from the perspective of not having someone who is working on the project convey those ideas, that someone in the audience can, these things that we know. But we haven't used a lot of social media at this point, or last year when I was teaching the studio. But I think social media has a big role to play.
Yeah, I was curious about that. I mean, I found it interesting that both of you have engaged small children, elementary school students. It looks like both of you have had examples, and I'm not to sound like an old fart, but they are more savvy with social media than I ever will be, right? And so, have you found that and this maybe is what you were saying just now, Hazel, that the generation both of students and of the audience that you're working with in terms of the community you're engaging are more visually savvy, more visually adept than they maybe used to be?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that we're seeing toddlers navigating a smartphone or an iPad, so I think we have to rise to that occasion of meeting them where their skills are, and so I think it's really important that we not discount social media and not discount the role of technology, but we embrace it because it's everywhere. And we can reach a larger audience as well through social media.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it is, that's interesting to me. I also, there was one other aspect of your participatory groups in terms of your classes that I noted, which is Hazel, when you were talking about what were these kids' dreams when they came in as freshmen, 17-year-olds, it was interesting to me that several of them, I mean, there was still the idea that, I want to become the most famous architect before I'm age 30, but several of them wanted to change the environment and make the world a better place. And Belinda, I think also your diagram of the changed, individual thinking that they're going to change the world to a more collective engagement is something that we're seeing already in our students. Have either of you seen that reflected in the audiences, the communities that you're engaging? In other words, is there more of say, an embrace of engaging with a community discourse than there may have been previously?
Well, I think today we share so much. We have so much access to so much information. It's so easy to share, which wasn't the case, 20 years ago, that it creates a completely new scenario. So people can share, people can raise their voice, even if, before you have to have a newspaper writing an article about a news, whereas today you can have a blog and write about it. You don't need to rely on these kind of power elements. So I think that makes us all a little more powerful, and it makes it a little more democratic. And of course, people are like, we're so used to share and so much looking forward to, to improve the environment, that people are very eager to try new tools and new ideas. So yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for experimentation, because there's so much that has to be designed yet, that I really encourage all the designers to start working on it.
I want to turn to some of the questions that have been submitted, and I want to remind people to please submit your questions in the Q&A as opposed to the chat, if you don't mind. So starting with William Leonard's question, who recognizes that we are in a particularly current environment is particularly hostile or divided, sometimes hostile communities. And he asks, how can collaboration by design actually heal community divisions? So I think that's an interesting question of, beyond, okay, how can we achieve consensus enough to get a project done or approved, but how can actually this process be used to heal and advance our communities' divisions or reduce our communities' division? Jump in.
I would like to say that for me, participation is very much about empathy and trying to understand how whatever is going to be affecting their lives, and trying to understand the other points of view. So I think, yeah, that's what I think.
And I would agree. And I think that building consensus is as much about understanding our differences, but more importantly, our similarities. And so maybe some of the discourse comes from not knowing how we have a shared experience or outcome through the process of design, that when we're talking about the individual rather than the collective, we may not get as far. But if we're working together, then I think that's much more powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, I would also like to add that actually for me, participation is not only about the final output, like that's just one thing, but it's just as important the process of getting there. and the kind of the community that is created around a particular topic or around a particular project. So I think that is just as important as a final consensus or final solution.
No, I would absolutely agree. So moving to Terry's question of, which essentially continues this line of thought, which is when, where, and how do you consider politics as part of the community engagement process? So I think, beyond the event of a community participation event, what would be the, how does one engage in politics? And I would add maybe how do you get students to understand the role of politics?
I think that politics, of course, one of the things that I try to instill in my students is that, often they think that I design it, it gets built, but projects may take 40 years to, and I'm thinking specifically about some of the projects in Washington, D.C. and in other cities where the plan was completed early on, or the conversations like the North of Massachusetts Avenue Business Improvement District was a conversation that started back in the 1960s. And the process of assembling the hundreds of parcels took time, and the introduction of the north of the Gallaudet New York Avenue metro station, the infill metro station, was the catalyst in many ways for the development of that area that NOMA bid. And so sometimes it's you've got to wait, and I believe there were 2 or 3 mayors, so we're covering quite some range of political of politics. And so we have to understand that that is a part of the process. That politics is a really significant. It may drop a project completely, and it may speed up a project to a certain extent, but most of the time it's projects take longer than expected, especially large projects.
I think that's an interesting point to bring in the idea of time and patience that's required. But I want to piggyback Rosalind, I don't know how it's pronounced, Elder's question, where she's noting that that oftentimes even the topics that are put forth for community discussion or community engagement have been defined by local officials or by politics, I would say, to continue on the previous question, Terry's question. And so how do you empower community participation without government influence? And of course, Belinda, you offered the example of that group of young people spray painting the bicycles in the streets in the middle of the night, which, I'm not going to encourage our students to do that around the GSD, but no, it is sort of like, what are some ways that you can see how communities can have a voice where it's not already defined for them, the platform? Yeah.
I mean, sometimes they are organized themselves. Sometimes you come as a kind of a mediator, trying to, to make, try to communicate what they are deciding. So, but as I said before, I think it's much more important to create the trust with the community than with the politicians, because these go back and forth, and they're not going to be there in 40 years time, as Hazel was saying. Some of these projects take forever. So, and no matter how amazing a project is, no matter how innovative it is, you have to get people on board. And sometimes I think we just take it for granted, because when we were students, we were saying, your design is amazing, and you just think that everybody's going to love it. And that's not the case. The other thing that I learned, I was working in France doing some participation a few years ago, and one of the things that I learned is that they have a very clear understanding of what is the scope of a meeting. And they say participation requires formación, which is education. And by that, I mean facts and data, because it's not a blank piece of paper in which we can do anything. You have to also let people know about what are the constraints, what are the political constraints, the social constraints, the economical constraints, the environmental constraints, the code. So they were saying, okay, if you want to come to this meeting to have a voice and to, you know, to have to discuss this, you have to come to the previous workshop to understand the complexities of the project. And I think that was very, very good, because it's not just about promising that anything that comes up in the workshop is going to happen. There are certain limitations in France and everywhere else.
What about you alluded to this question, Belinda, in your presentation, but can we dive into it deeper, both of you? The question of who has time to participate and who has, you know, so when we say, okay, there's a community participation, we're going to achieve consensus, and we feel like, okay, the democratic process is hard at work, and everyone, you know, not everyone will be completely happy, but at least everyone will have had a voice. And we know that, especially in today's world, that's incredibly hard. And so what are some ways you see of overcoming this problem of who has time to participate?
I think in many cases, we have to show flexibility for timing that can accommodate more people who aren't working kind of a traditional 9 to 5, if you will, but who still want to be, I guess, informed about the decisions in the process, but can't come to a meeting that's during the day, where they have, you know, maybe they're in school, they have other issues that are preventing them from being at the regular meeting. One of my colleagues, when I worked in Baltimore, used to say, you know, want to make sure that we have people who are in the neighborhoods that are being impacted at the meetings, or at least let them know that they are being, that their neighborhood's going to be impacted. And so he would go to where he knew the people were. In some cases, it was at the basketball courts or at certain parts of a neighborhood, but he would make sure that it wasn't just the posting of the notices in whatever the, you know, or the in the newspaper or in other sources. And now, of course, with social media and with more and more access to the technology, you know, people can find out what's going on in their neighborhoods, and in many cases voice their opinions through the chat or other outlets.
That actually ties into, so let me add to this. That ties into Scott Rivers' question, where he talks about the distinction between in-person and communicating by technology. And if I'm not mistaken, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, I think Cambridge has continued to have their zoning meetings by Zoom. I think the board is in person, but the public can engage by Zoom, which is great in some ways. But what does that do in a world where we've learned that there are limits to the engagement when we're engaging by technology? And so what are the pluses, minuses, or do you see that, you know, yes, you can tune in if you have a job that doesn't let you come in and does let you Zoom in, but what do you lose when you have that connection shifted over to technology?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have a couple of comments about that. The first one is that no matter what channel you define, it will never be enough. So I think it's, you know, participation will always require a number of different tools. Like, you know, not everybody's going to show up in person. Not everybody's going to use an app. Not everybody's going to post on social media. And we have to acknowledge that. And so I think for me, it's not about people having the time. It's people having the incentive to come or the incentive to join the conversation, because sometimes some of these projects are such long-term processes that they're a little bit too abstract, and sometimes it's difficult to get people, you know, to, let's say, waste some time today for something that is going to be happening over the next 20 or 30 years. So my question is how can you get people incentivized and inspired by having this kind of long-term vision, but also implementing something that is affecting their lives today. So these low-hanging fruits. So that's, for me, that's the kind of the gap that we have to bridge, because otherwise it's very difficult sometimes to get people on board for something that is extremely abstract, extremely long-term or uncertain. And also because we are overwhelmed with information, with work and everything else. So it's very difficult to make the time. But yeah, that would be my thinking.
And if I could just,
Yeah.
and this is related to the campus plan that I worked on in 1998. Not a lot of technology was available, but one of the things when we presented to the community, either through the advisory neighborhood commission meetings or other means, when we only had 2 new construction projects. Both were on parking lot sites that had been placeholders since the early probably 60s, 50s, and 60s. And the residents who lived in one of those neighborhoods that surrounded that site zoomed in completely to the fact that, oh, there's 700 parking spaces, and now you're going to build a library and a park. Our neighborhood is already heavily impacted by, faculty, staff, students parking and taking our parking spaces, on-street parking spaces. So we were able to hire a transportation consultant. And I don't remember exactly how many meetings they actually had, but he met with a group of residents that were impacted by, the major displacement in that neighborhood, and displacement from the parking lot. And for those who were in Washington in the late 90s and 2000s, the result was along 4th Street, putting in speed humps and other traffic calming measures to slow the traffic down, but also looking at ways that the university could offset the parking issue. And so, again, getting to a point where we were showing the residents that there was trust, that we're listening to them, but also, taking the steps to ensure that we were good neighbors.
So that brings me to the question of scale, which Richard Corchalis brings up in his question in the Q&A, where he was pointing out. So I think the parking is a really interesting question, because that's a citywide question, even though it's often exacerbated by a neighborhood scale. And Richard points out that most of the participation examples that we've been discussing so far and that you had in your examples were at the neighborhood or city level. What about examples of, say, a transit system that affects several cities along a line? I can imagine also highway systems, but essentially, what about participation at a regional level? How is that possible? Or do you have any examples of engaging at a regional level?
Yeah, I think precisely for that particular scale, working with technology and trying to gather data in a more, efficient way is super important, because we cannot be, knocking door by door at a regional level, trying to understand, how people think about it. One of the slides that I shared is this platform in which we are kind of doing the planning of a city, and we want to make the process as transparent and understandable as possible. So this idea of showing the different scenarios so that people can comment, as they are doing right now in the chat. So you can track down how people are feeling, and maybe you can track down also how people are feeling by areas of the city. So this idea of kind of geo-referencing the mood, the questions, the challenges, and the dreams and the expectations of the people in the map. So you have a map of how people are reacting to solutions on real time. So this idea of, a repository of, let's say, reactions. So there is a number of examples of that, and is completely doable with today's technologies.
Hazel, have you worked at a larger scale project?
Most of it has been local neighborhood scale, but I was thinking, as I was listening to your question, about the metropolitan planning organizations, the Council of Governments, and how their participation in looking at issues that impact the region as opposed to the individual cities, I think is very important.
I mean, I will point to, I maybe overuse this example, but Wacker's manual for the Chicago plan was issued to all 8th graders in Chicago for a period of, I think it was from 1912 to 1939. So imagine that every 8th grader in Chicago through the public school system in their civics class learned about the Chicago plan in a book that was essentially translated for them, for kids, 8th graders on the cusp of adulthood. or at least teenagedom, and how that, I am convinced that that had a huge impact on an audience for understanding design and the complex process of city planning for the city of Chicago. So I do think that that's also, speaking to the way you're going to the fifth graders, Hazel, or you're using the kids also, Belinda, in your examples. I do think that there are ways to reach those audiences. But let me turn to Lance J. Brown. Hey, Lance, and Chana House's questions, because they are really speaking about how do you find community members? How do the community leaders search for you? Were you recommended, and by whom? Sort of how do you get into this work? And then Chana, I think, asks a question that's quite relevant to the way that people think today, which is, are there ways that you've compensated the community for their time and contribution to a project? Which I think is a question that doesn't get raised very often, but is quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I can start. So every time that we start a project, we try to do this physical mapping, which is understanding the physical reality of the community, but also the social mapping, which is understanding what are the forces, who are the leaders that we want to work with, who are the leaders that we maybe need to avoid, because we don't want to be attached to any particular political whatever. So we are neutral. We're trying to make the most for everyone. So, this understanding of the physical and the social kind of components of the same reality, it takes already some portion of the time. And then the other question is, sorry, what was the other question?
Oh, that do you compensate?
Oh, yeah. The compensation. So we haven't done it like in a monetary way, but we have done things like, for instance, when every teenager that participated in Norway, we hire a photographer and we gave them a high quality photo of themselves. So this idea of kind of also trying to give something in return and trying to provide an experience. So in some of the workshops, we offer, dinner, or we offer lunch, so this idea that, again, it is an experience. It's not only that we are extracting information, which is very useful for us, but also so that they can take with them something that is positive, creating some new links and trying to make it a positive experience, always creative and positive. We try.
Hazel, what do you think?
I haven't been involved in a project where we've given compensation, monetary compensation, but I know that there have been instances where gift cards and other things, similar things have been given. I think similar to what Belinda said, often it's a meal, or it's part of, their participation. They have lunch, or, something that signifies what their participation or their role in the process. Yeah, I would also like to mention that at some points when people were extremely active and engaged, we hired them. We ended up hiring them, so they became part of the process as let's say formally. So that's another thing that has happened to us.
I think that makes a lot of sense. It's really interesting. I want to turn to Kathy Simon, and hey, Kathy, to your question in the Q&A, where she brings up the topic of climate change and sea level rise, and how you engage communities with this urgency. And obviously, Hazel, again, with your students who were talking about their dreams at age 17, they're aware of this issue. They're the ones living it. And Belinda, your students showed Newbury Street underwater in one of their videos. So how do you engage communities on this topic, or how do you further encourage your students to do so in a productive way? So in our case at Howard, the third year design studios, which are primarily targeted towards housing, those have been, I think, the second semester, so the spring semester, one of the faculty has been working in neighborhoods in Virginia negatively impacted by sea level rise. And so as part of that studio, they make a site visit down to that part of Virginia, the Norfolk area, and work with the residents. And so
by third year, I guess we don't feel that they have the broad understanding of, how to address the problems in first or second year, but by the third year, they have the skills. They also have the skills to convey the ideas graphically. So that's where we have focused on climate change issues, particularly in studio, but then we have other classes, the lecture classes that also address those concerns.
What about when they are about to fly off into the world, like that transition at graduation or recent alumni? If you heard back from them, I find it always, it's a real responsibility of ours to ensure that students understand. I think, Belinda, as you were saying, everyone, when you're a student, you think everyone's going to love your project, and then you suddenly realize what it's like to do a project and just all of the challenges. And so what is your engagement with your recently graduated students and how they're trying to be engaged in the world?
Yeah, I am. One student last semester was telling me one thing that made me think a lot, and she was saying this was before the AI like super was all over the place. It was actually last year, and she was saying, you know what, I want to do an internship with you because I want to be much more aware about the social impact and get familiar with the tools to work with people, because images will be produced by AI anyway. So she would say, design, we're done with that. We have to create this kind of sensibility, this empathy, this idea of engaging with the people. And I thought that was very honest, and it was very beautiful. So yeah, regarding the climate change, I think students today, they're super aware. They're super, let's say, even a little bit anxious. Like, when I ask them to pick up topics, everything is very related to environmental issues, sea level rise, extreme heat, waste, I don't know, and recycling, like everything has to do with that. So they're very much on top of it. I think our role at the school is to give them the skills and to make them feel and believe that design has the answer for these issues. Like there's no way that climate change is going to be just solved by designers or by politicians or by the industry. Like it has to be designed, but it will have to be participatory. Everybody has to be part of this change. So I think, again, they're super aware, they're super conscious, they really want to have an impact in the world. And I think we need to make them inspired and powerful to really bring back these skills and this talent that they have, because they're amazingly talented, to their hometowns and home countries. So yeah.
And if I could just say that, I think what you just said, Belinda, I believe I want our students to become licensed architects, certified planners, and whatever certification they may have or licensure that may exist. But I want them to be thought leaders, and I want them to be able to take those ideas, those what we're teaching them in their program, and be able to translate them in a variety of needs, make them more specific to the concerns of their communities. And so one of the things that we see in the fifth year is that our students have been listening. So the woman who wanted to address environmental issues, the topography in Trinidad, that became the basis of her thesis project. And so over time, over the 5 years of the program, they have gained these tools in their toolkit to be able to address those real life concerns of their communities, places that are very important to them. And we see that I've been there, this is my technically my 8th year. I'm on sabbatical, but my 8th year at Howard. And I've seen it time after time where, there are real life issues that are being addressed by, what they've learned in their classes and studios.
That's great. That will transition me to the next question. But before I ask that question, I'm going to ask the audience to do a little homework. Which is, I'd like for you to put in the chat your suggestions for how the school can teach our students to better be better prepared or better engage a broader public. What do you suggest, either from your experience or what you think was missing from your own education, how should design faculty teach students to engage a broader public? And then I just want to return to that point you were making, Hazel, about the experiences surrounding these students. I mean, your students are in Washington, our students are here in Boston. Both cities offer extraordinary examples of things that need to be changed and how important it is for a constituency to be engaged to help advance a city. And this ties in part to your question, Francesca. And Francesca, you're here in Boston, and so you can actually help the school on this question. How do we engage the cities around us in terms of the help that they need? And this also ties into the anonymous attendee who asks the question at the end, when's the right time to introduce students to participatory design techniques? And is the GSD integrating this into the core curricula in architecture? I would say architecture in all our departments. So I'll answer that. And then I'm going to throw this to both of you, Belinda and Hazel. In terms of how we engage Boston, I am really committed to trying to engage Boston more. I think it's incredibly important. Boston offers us an incredible tableau of examples of how we can engage and improve, and issues that are urban issues, architectural issues, landscape issues, real estate issues, participation issues. And so it is introduced in all of the 3 departmental cores in different ways, in that most of the core curricula have sites that are local, and students go to do site visits and often engage local community members. I will say the planning department is foremost in inviting those community members back for juries. They've been extraordinary with that. Some of the other departments do that as well, but I would give urban planning an extra shout out for their inclusion of community members on design juries in the core. But that's something where, so we have the landscape program does work in Franklin Park and engages community members there. We've had architecture do projects in Chelsea and Lynn. Urban design is also working in Lynn. So that's something that we see all over. And we're trying to get students to hear from the community when they're working, while also acknowledging that they're still learning the skills of design. I think this speaks to what you said earlier, Hazel, of, some students aren't yet ready to enter into all of the complexities. They're frankly still learning what design means. But I wonder if Belinda and Hazel, you have examples of how students can engage their direct communities.
Mm-hmm.
Lindsay,
Yeah.
that's a good example in the chat from Howard.
Mm-hmm. I like the idea of, opening up a little bit the GSD to the broader world. I like this idea of kind of unlocking information. I like this idea of open data. So, I see the GSD like literally as a factory of ideas. It's a place with a lot of energy, with a lot of talented people work very hard to produce innovation and a lot of design. And sometimes I feel that this is not reaching out the community, and this is such a pity, because there's, again, the question is how to make it a little more blended. How can we spread the word and get people inspired to be more interested also in design? Because I think, again, it's a very amazing discipline. So just the fact that, as you are saying, Sarah, that some of the core studios are based locally so that they can come and discover, and experience. I don't know, we were visiting the site last year in Core for Landscape, and it was extremely cold. And I thought it was amazing because, we keep on talking about, climatic comfort and all of that. And we were standing there for an hour and we were freezing. And that was great because it's like, okay, these are the things that we need to address. So this idea of experiencing, this idea of kind of being in contact and being exposed to what other professionals are doing locally I love this idea of kind of creating this connection between reality and utopia. And it's not only good for our community, it's also good for the other community. It goes both ways, because these people are also sometimes too constrained by reality, which is always overwhelming and complex. And they need this kind of fresh ideas to also re-energize themselves, because probably they studied and they finished, I don't know, many years ago. And, you know, reality sometimes is just too overwhelming. So I think it's a both way path. And I think any kind of relation that can be created in that way is a very positive one for both sides.
Hazel.
Do you mind repeating the question? I was looking at the chat.
No, I know the chat is unbelievable, and do know, people, that we are saving the chat. We really do want your feedback and suggestions, so this is deliberate. No, so the question is how do you engage your local environment? And so Lindsay already offered an example from Howard. You can piggyback off of that one, or sort of your own examples of how you guys engage Washington.
So if I'm not mistaken, Lindsay started the program before I came in as department chair, maybe the year or two before I came in as department chair. And we had Howard has had this long tradition of preparing activist architects. And so it was a part of our culture to engage the students in the community very early on. And so her class and others were on the ground, if you will, with different community groups. Mm-hmm. More recently, last year, the 2023, the 21-22 semester, in our freshman design thinking and making class, where we utilized the fabrication lab to teach the students the design thinking process and how to work with different materials, the professors decided to engage a community in a school in Baltimore, Maryland, so outside of Washington, D.C., on a project. And they were actually working with this, I think it was a private elementary school. So they engaged with them to make, with the professor and the students, who were very young, very, very young, to develop toys that would help in the students' learning process. And I'm bringing this up because that was an early introduction for the first-year students, our first-year students, to a community engagement process, because they had to understand the needs of the students, their learning abilities, their differences, and so forth, and come up with these really exciting projects that at the end of the semester, the children, if you will, the students at the elementary school were given. And I unfortunately don't have any. I've got to take, Belinda, you've taught me, I've got to take a lot of pictures to prepare for these types of presentations. But, it was really amazing to see the interaction between our students. And so they're 18 at this point, with the younger students who may have been, more than 10 years old. But to watch how they were developing this vocabulary of engagement, even though they hadn't had a formal class or instruction on how to do that.
Oh, I think that's a really, really interesting example, and a really wonderful one to close on, this idea of because I say, if your suggestion in the chat, and I've been trying to see that there's so many great suggestions, say if yours of saying that, can we integrate the community engagement process as part of the jury process, I think is great. But I also really, really do like this idea, Hazel, of having our students engage elementary school students and take the role, sort of put them in the role of engaging an audience and helping have them learn how to communicate with an audience and get them excited. And an audience where our students might feel like they have maybe a little more agency and are a little less afraid of the process, and where the reality might already be a little more creative, Belinda, in dealing with elementary school students. I'll note that the GSD's expanded our outreach to younger people. In addition to design discovery and design discovery youth, we now have efforts to engage even younger audiences, and we're trying to expand that, because I think that that is, going back to the Wacker manual, that's, I think, a really useful way of reaching a broad public. This is a very tough topic. It's complicated. I think that new media have created differences in how we, introduce new possibilities, but also challenges for how we engage a broader audience. I think that the political situation of our climate today has put huge challenges. And I, will note those were some of the first questions in the chat. Everyone has that on their mind. But I think that what I appreciated about today's conversation and all of the engagement from the audience is there are clearly ways of reaching broader audiences, and that's part of our role. If we want to make the world a better place, we have to actually figure out how to engage with the world that we want to make better. And I greatly appreciate, Belinda and Hazel, your time, taking the time and offering us your expertise in your very different examples of having engaged communities and over periods of time and in different environments. And I really do want to thank the audience for all your participation. And again, thank you. It's nice to see so many friends and former students. And I really appreciate everyone taking the time today. And please continue reaching out to us. And if you have ways that you think the GSD can do this, Same, I appreciate your suggestion, and we'll talk offline about that. I think there are some very useful ideas for how we can make the GSD help our students engage a broader audience as they graduate and work in the world. So I want to thank everyone for a really lively discussion. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Hazel. Very nice to.
Bye,
everyone. Thank you, everyone, for attending.